Hey, so someone recently requested that I do a video about the subtypes of avoidant personality disorder, so I'm going to do that, and I'm going to go over the psychologist-defined subtypes, but using my own definitions, because I think theirs are a little unnecessarily wordy. And then after that, I'll explain what I think a more useful way to think about these is, because they aren't really subtypes in the sense of you either have this type of AvPD or this type of AvPD. But anyway, the first subtype is the phobic subtype, which is said to be a person that deals with general anxiety that's made much more extreme by specific, tangible things that they can avoid, pretty much all social situations. So that's an easy one. The conflicted subtype is someone that deals with a lot of conflicted feelings between basically what they want and how anxious those things make them. So, for example, I would like to have a social life and friends and such, but I have a really hard time talking to anyone for any length of time because of how anxious it makes me. I sort of have these paradoxical thoughts of how can I really want this if it makes me so anxious to actually do it. And I don't feel like I can necessarily achieve the things the way I want them at any point. And it's sort of the opposite as well as how much I dislike my dependence on others, but at the same time how much I need it to continue to be able to avoid my anxiety. So, for example, I'm currently living with and dependent on my parents, and I'd really like to be independent, but at the same time, what being independent actually means is a whole lot of things that cause me a whole lot of anxiety. And so it's like, do I really actually want that? So that's what that subtype is. Then there's the hypersensitive type, which is someone that's particularly suspicious and paranoid that people are always judging them, basically. So like I talked about in my previous videos, hyperfixations on every little thing that everyone does, thinking that any raise of the eyebrow or change in tone of voice is a sign that they're judging me for something I just did or said. And it's also said that this subtype is, depending on the setting they're in, either very panicky and unassertive and unable to stand up for themselves, or extremely over-defensive and quick to outwardly defend themselves. So the way this plays out for me is in pretty much all scenarios, especially in public. This happened a lot in school. I'm completely unable to defend myself in any way. If anyone criticizes me or questions anything I did, even just very politely, I'm just completely unable to defend myself. I just shut down. I just try to retract whatever I said so it doesn't have to be a debate, and I'm just sitting there extremely embarrassed, and the more anyone presses me on it, the more embarrassed I get, and I'll deal with a lot of panic symptoms, the physical anxiety symptoms I've talked about in previous videos. And if it's someone I'm more comfortable with, I might be a lot more likely to be outwardly defensive a lot faster, because in any scenario I'm seeing these signs that people are judging me or criticizing me, and it makes me feel really bad. But with someone I'm more comfortable with, I'm more likely to outwardly defend myself, and since I'm doing that about things that weren't necessarily actually criticisms of me, it comes across as being overly defensive and overly sensitive to things. So that's that subtype. Then there's the self-deserting subtype, which is someone, it's kind of like the conflicted subtype, but the opposite, in the sense that um, instead of feeling conflicted between the things that they want and the fact that all of those things make them so anxious, they instead say, those things make me so anxious. I don't really want those things. And so they just try to forget about the things that they wanted, which especially can apply in the way for me of like a career that I wanted. Like I wanted to work in game development, and now I'm realizing that I'm not going to be able to because of anxiety. So, or years ago I did, and so if I was to be the self-deserting subtype, it would be the case that I would sort of just say, I never really wanted to work in game development. It makes me so anxious. How could I want that? And just sort of forget about it and give up on it. And the same thing can apply to their shameful memories, rather than where a conflicted person might think about their shameful memories and say, that made me so embarrassed, but it really shouldn't have, and try to kind of confront it. Somebody like this might be more likely to just try to forget about them as soon as possible. And this sort of person is extremely likely to be very depressed and very suicidal feeling. Then there are two other subtypes which are by different psychologists, but we'll go ahead and add them here. So there's the cold avoidant subtype, which is someone that is unable to experience and express positive emotions towards others, and the exploitable avoidant subtype, which is someone who's basically unable to stand up for themselves or resist coercion. So it's more or less like the first part of the hypersensitive subtype I mentioned, where in most scenarios I'm extremely passive, basically. So The thing about these is that I don't really think they're subtypes in the sense that you can just have one or the other. They can still be useful in the sense of which symptoms am I dealing with the most, but I think there's an even more useful way to look at some of them, um, which is really two different things. So the first is, I think three of the subtypes are more or less symptoms that everyone with AvPD experiences, but the way they experience them and the degree to which they experience them changes depending on the stage of the disorder they're in or the current intensity of the disorder, basically. So the phobic subtype, that's basically just what AvPD is. You know, general anxiety, but extreme anxiety tied to these social situations that you feel like you can avoid to reduce your anxiety, even though it makes you feel bad in other ways. And so the main thing that changes is, the level of avoidance. If you're very low functioning, you might avoid completely everything, including seeking treatment and going to doctors and talking to therapists and all that. Or if you're more high functioning, you might be able to still work and stuff like that, and you just avoid big outings and parties and things like that. Even though you're still dealing with the anxiety at the root of it. Then when you're really at the lowest stage of avoidant personality disorder and you're not functioning very well and you're avoiding pretty much everything, I think that's when you tend to experience the most of the self-deserting symptoms. You're very depressed and you try not to think about the things that you wanted because you feel so unable to do them because of your anxiety that you feel like you don't really want those things at all. And you also avoid having to express emotions that you're uncomfortable with in doing that. And in that case, you might feel like you don't even experience those emotions. Like, for example, when I read the cold avoidant is supposedly someone who is unable to experience and express positive emotions. I don't know that that's the case. I think when you're dealing with self-deserting symptoms a lot, you feel like you're unable to experience those emotions and you just don't even try to express them. And then at a different stage, you do feel like you experience them a lot and you just have a hard time expressing them. And that other stage is when I think you're dealing with the conflicted symptoms a lot. So when you're at a slightly higher functioning stage and there's certain things that you're not avoiding because you're trying to make progress, I think you deal with the conflicted symptoms a lot. And that's more or less where I'm at right now. I'm successful in not avoiding going to doctor's appointments and things like that, but I still avoid nearly everything else as far as basic daily functioning. So, I'm slightly less depressed because I'm more aware of the things I want. They're just more present in my mind, and I'm working towards trying to get them, but at the same time, I have these conflicted symptoms I was talking about where I constantly dwell on, this makes me so anxious, how can this be what I want, how am I going to be able to do this, and I deal with the maladaptive daydreaming that I've talked about in other videos a whole lot at this point. And even though my depression is a little bit better because I'm thinking about the things that I want to achieve, my anxiety is far worse because, I'm constantly dealing with the dread of things that are upcoming that I feel like I'm going to embarrass myself at. I deal with panic during those things actually happening, and then I deal with the shameful feelings afterwards, feeling like I embarrassed myself in all the ways that I thought I would. And of course, these aren't stages like the lifespan of a frog or something, you can go back and forth. And there are definitely days where I feel more like I'm dealing with the self-deserting symptoms. But in general, I deal with those less now, and I deal more with the conflicted symptoms. So that's what I mean when I don't say I necessarily think these are really subtypes, I think as I become more high functioning, I will deal with both of these less often. But I have dealt with them a whole lot throughout my life. So, I don't think they're subtypes in that sense. They're just symptoms that I experienced more at particular points and will continue to vary throughout my life, probably. And then I think the other subtypes that we haven't talked about, I think they're more useful as far as distinguishing different people with AvPD, because I think they really distinguish what types of emotional expression each individual with AvPD has more or less difficulty with. And again, they're not subtypes. I think you'll have some difficulty with all of these, most likely, or you may have limited difficulty with any one in particular. But the point is not just one type or the other, it's just how much are you dealing with these. And I think that's the most useful way to think about it as far as, just trying to describe yourself, especially if you're in therapy or something. Not as being a particular subtype, but just I deal with these issues of emotional expression more. So, For example, I think the cold avoidance subtype could be described better as being a category of emotional expression that relates to positive and empathetic emotions. Like, how anxious does it make you to try to express those emotions, and to what extent are you able to get past that? Because like I've talked about in a lot of my videos, it's basically patterns in our life, or at least it was the case for me, where I try to express positive emotions to people and be empathetic, and I usually received either a negative response or no response. And when people try to express those emotions to me, it often felt like they weren't able to back it up consistently with their actions. So it's hard for me to trust those emotions, and so it's really hard for me to express them. And I obviously want to try really hard to get better at that, but I think that is a useful way to see the cold avoidant subtype. I'm not unable to experience positive emotions, and I'm not unable to express them either, but I do have a lot of difficulty with it. And again, I think there are 3 categories of these, and that's just one of them, and how much you will have difficulty with each category depends on the individual person. So the next category would be kind of paralleled by the exploitable avoidant subtype, which is the same question: how much difficulty do you have expressing confident and assertive emotions? So I already explained that I have a lot of difficulty with this in most scenarios, and it's again more or less for the same reasons. Whenever I tried to act confident before, it felt like I was shot down a whole lot in my childhood, and so I kind of lost all my confidence. And so I'm really bad at asserting myself in most situations. And so yeah, that's another category of emotions that people with AvPD will have varying difficulty with. And the hypersensitive subtype, the first half of it, how it says alternately, depending on the setting, either you're panicky and unassertive and unable to stand up for yourselves, or extremely overdefensive. The first half of that is more or less the exploitable avoidant subtype. And the second half is what you could call just the sensitive avoidance subtype, which is really just difficulty with expressing patience and trust, and just being inquisitive and making sure you understand things before you react to them. And this is something I have difficulty with too, but I've improved a whole lot in this area. It's again for the same reasons. It feels like people were just never patient and trusting with me, and they always sort of assumed the worst of anything and assumed that I was being mean to them. And so I have a really hard time doing those things myself, but I've gotten a whole lot better at it. And so yeah, that's sort of what I mean. Is I think there's those 3 groups that you can define yourself as having a varying level of difficulty with compared to other people with AvPD. And I think that's really the most useful way to look at it. I don't necessarily think there's these subtypes, I'm one or the other, but I just think as far as actually being useful, there's different symptoms that you experience more at different stages, and then there's these issues of emotional expression that you may have varying difficulty with depending on the exact circumstances that caused your difficulties with AvPD in the first place. So yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say on that. I don't know if it's too interesting or useful, but I just thought it'd be cool to go over the psychologist-defined subtypes, so that you know what people that think they know a whole lot about this disorder from the outside think about it, and then what I think about it from inside, as far as they're not actually being different types, but still useful ways to distinguish the problems you're having more specifically, so you can try to work on improving them. But yeah, anyway, that's about it for this time, and I will see you guys soon.